There is a slight delay, and as soon as those things are made right, we will begin. Good afternoon. My name is the Reverend Andrea Arsene, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to All Saints Episcopal Church here in the beautiful city of Indianapolis as we commemorate the life of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray together. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to consider the work of God in the world in ways that perhaps we haven't seen often or we often expect. For your care, I do want to let you know that if you exit these doors to my right and go either upstairs or downstairs, there are facilities that if you should need to use them. They're gendered upstairs restrooms, non-gendered downstairs. If there's any other needs you have, we do have ushers along the side, and they can assist you with whatever you might need. At this time, I would like to invite Denise to come forward with a reading.
This is a poem and quotations from the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Dark Testament. A poem by Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, Dark Testament. Hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers, Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a word in a tuneless ditty, a word whispered with the wind, a dream of 40 acres and a mule, a cabin of one's own and a moment to rest, a name and place for one's children and children's children at last. Hope is a song in a weary throat. Give me a song of hope in a world where I can sing it. Give me a song of faith and a people to believe in it. Give me a song of kindliness and a country where I can live it. Give me a song of hope and love and a brown girl's heart to hear it. A few quotes. Great art is not a matter of presenting one side or another, but presenting a picture so full of the contradictions, tragedies, and insights of the period that the impact is at once disturbing and satisfying. Another quote goes, "What is often called exceptional ability is nothing more than a persistent endeavor." Black women historically have been doubly victimized by the twin immoralities of Jim Crow and Jane Crow. Black women faced with these dual barriers have often found that sex bias is more formidable than racial bias. Another quote, "One person plus one typewriter constitutes a movement." And then, true community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that binds us together.
Good afternoon. I have the honor today of introducing Miss Rosita Stevens-Holsey, the niece of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. I had to write things down because Miss Rosita has been very busy all of her life. She's an educator, an author, and a community activist, and the family historian of her aunt, Pauli Murray. Prior to moving back home to Washington, D.C., Ms. Rosita was a systems engineer for IBM, a regional coordinator of minority studies for the Department of Defense Overseas School System. Ask her later on the good trouble she made in Germany. She was founder of a management consulting firm in Atlanta and director of the Regional Minority Purchasing Council in partnership with the Savannah Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Rosita holds a BS in Science and Education and a master's degree in Counseling and Human Services. She is founder of Preserving Pauli Murray, which she created to uplift the legacy of her dear aunt. Ms. Rosita has followed her Aunt Pauli in her lead in advocating for human rights issues and fighting against discrimination against women, minorities, and all marginalized peoples. Reverend Pauli will be present with us today through the words, the wisdom, and the intimate recollections of Miss Rosita. History is alive today, and we are very blessed to have Miss Rosita present with us. So sit back, open your hearts, and receive the grace of this moment. Miss Rosita?
Hello? No, no. Okay. I'm so pleased to be here, and I have been waiting a year to come. I met some of your parishioners at the Love Fest in Baltimore, and that's when they asked me to come and speak with you. I just want to share a little bit about how I got here. Pauli Murray is a very challenging person to talk about because she was involved in so many things. She had such a wealth of experiences and education and different vocations. So I hope it won't seem difficult to follow me, but I want to share some things from all parts of her life. People ask me, am I really her niece? I sometimes just have no idea why. Maybe it's because they've never met her and she seems like a bigger figure than she ever was, at least physically. But yes, she was a real person, an ordinary human being, and she had 5 brothers and sisters. She was number 4 in terms of birth, and my mother, Rosita, was number 5 a year later, and the last child was Robert Fitzgerald a year after that. But he was always called Raymond, and this seemed to confuse people because there didn't appear to be any reason for that. So I am her niece and the daughter of Rosetta. Now there are 2 living nieces. I'm the oldest and the matriarch, and my sister will be 80 in a week. And then there are 2 brothers who live in New York in their 70s. But we do have about 20 or 30 second cousin grandnieces and other relatives of that nature. When I was 2 and my sister was being born, Pauli was still at Howard University Law School. It was around the time of her graduation, and thank you. And she met me. Of course, I don't remember that, but that was the first time that I know of that we laid eyes on each other. And then a little later, when I was about 6 years old, she was in Washington again, and I have memories of that as a child, running around between her and her dog, admiring the dog, playing with the dog, and talking with her. She was a very petite woman, as my mother was, and they were both about the same size, and Uncle Raymond was also rather small. And, but she was a giant to me. She was a giant because she was such a wordsmith. She seemed so brilliant, so well-traveled. She could talk about anything. And I was fascinated by the fact that, that she knew so many important people. I wasn't quite sure who they were or how she met them, but I always heard from other relatives that she was talking to this person or at a luncheon with that person, or she was at the White House and things of that nature. So she always seemed like a giant to me. A little later on, I got the opportunity to spend more time with her because I asked, thank you, that I get to meet some of the people that she knew. So I just want to give you that background as to my interaction with her. Also, in Washington, my family and my Aunt Mildred's family were what we called Pauli Murray's Washington, D.C. headquarters. She never had to go to a hotel or find a friend to stay with. She had two loving sisters in Washington, and so we were either at our house or my Aunt Mildred's house when she was in town. There was always a lot of things going on, and she usually came in town to meet with important people or to be honored. After she died, still I didn't quite know the impact that she had made on the world, or the impact that she should have made on the world, because she was one of those hidden heroes, that's what I call her. So often people of color and women were not written up in the history books. They were not selected for important jobs or very visible jobs. They were often in the background or really didn't have that opportunity. I always wondered why, with all the education that she had, that she didn't seem to have what I thought was like a big-time job. But as I learned more about history and more about politics, I realized the difference. Also, I was born in Massachusetts. There weren't very many people of color around me during that time. Then my father did his psychiatric residency at Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, and we were on a complex with a lot of people who were becoming psychiatrists or who were psychiatrists, and there were very few people of color there. And then before I moved to Washington, we then lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So there were probably more animals than there were people of color where I lived. So that was sort of my upbringing, and it wasn't until I moved to Washington that I realized all of the problems it was to be female and to be a person of color. Before I got involved in what I call my passion project, which is telling the world about my amazing aunt, I heard from other family members that something was going on in Durham. Have you been called? Do you know what's going on in Durham? Has anyone from Duke called you? No, no one from Duke had called me. I didn't know what was going on, but there was this buzz about her. I think it was probably after she was determined to be a saint in the Episcopal Church that more people started looking into who was this woman they had never heard of. So my niece said she would take me to Durham for my birthday, and we would find out for ourselves just what this was all about. So we land at the airport, go straight to our hotel. We're standing at the desk trying to get checked in, and the clerk hears us talking about Aunt Pauli. And of course, Pauli is a very unusual name. So we turned around. Are you talking to us? She said, yes. And the clerk said, are you talking about Pauli Murray? And we said, yes. And he said, well, are you here to go to feast day? We said, no. And she said, well, it's going on at St. Titus tonight. You should go. She said, you know, call an Uber and get over there. So I had never been to a feast day. I had never met a saint in my own mind because, of course, Aunt Pauli was just Aunt Pauli to me. But we get in an Uber. We go over to the little St. Titus that was built, I think, in the 1800s. Aunt Pauli's two aunts were founding members of St. Titus. We walk in, and it's like Pauli Murray from side to side, Pauli Murray everywhere. There were tapestries and paintings and drawings. and almost on any surface, people had put something about Pauli Murray there. And as we sat down and tried to find a seat, we realized everyone in that tiny little church was there to honor our aunt. They had waited for a bishop to come to speak, a specific one that they wanted to have. And everyone who got up and talked just praised Aunt Pauli, said wonderful things about her, talked about how they were inspired, talked about what she had done in the church and for the church. And I was mesmerized. When it was all over, they announced something about, well, you know, ice cream social will follow. And so for about a half an hour, pick up your ice cream, and then we'll be closing in about 30 minutes. So we go and get ice cream like everyone else, and we're standing around talking, and I turn around and I see this long line of people, like to the wall, in a line. I look at my niece and I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I think they want to talk to you, or I think they want to talk to us." And I turned around and I asked the lady, "Were you waiting to talk to me?" And she said, "Yes." I couldn't believe it. So I looked at the line. It was about 20 minutes in. And so people just came, they stood, their ice cream, they stood. When they were finished their ice cream, and there were people who had never met her, but had to tell me and my niece what they thought about her, how they had been inspired by her writings, and things that they had found out about her. There were a few people who actually had met her and not knew her well, but had interacted with her, and they just wanted to share whatever that memory was. And then there were people who really didn't know about her, but someone had suggested that they come to the feast day and find out about her. They all stood there and stayed like another hour and a half. We talked to each one of them. And then the people in charge of the church said they wanted to lock the church up and go home. They had already been there much, much longer than they anticipated. So my niece and I are outside waiting for our Uber. And I looked at her and I said, "I think I'm having an out-of-body experience." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, I don't know what to think. She said, "Well, what are you feeling like?" I said, "I feel like I'm on cloud 9. I said, "All these people here revere our aunt. All these people here feel it's important to talk about her. All these people here came out to be inspired and to be a part of this." And I said, "I just don't know what to think." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And I said, "What are we going to do about it?" And she said, "Okay, what are we going to do about it?" I said, "Well, all these people care so much about her and what she did and the things that she said and who she was. I said, we need to do something also." And she said, "All right, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I've always enjoyed teaching children. I've always shared with children the people that the curriculum thought that they should know about. And I can certainly share what I know about her and what I can learn about her." I said, "So that's what I can do." She said, "Well, how will you do that?" I said, "Well, maybe I could write a book." I had never thought of writing a book, and certainly not about a family member. I really didn't know I had a family member who should have been very important and should have been cared about and should have had a much better life than she actually had. But we talked all the way back to the hotel. We stayed up till about 3 o'clock talking about our experience. And that became my Pauli Murray epiphany. My whole life changed at that minute. The next day, we had planned to go meet Barbara Lau. And Barbara Lau was the founding executive director of the Pauli Murray Project. She was a folklorist, and she was employed by Duke, and she worked with the John Franklin Institute, that part of Duke. And so they had been really working on things about Aunt Pauli, as well as carrying the regular jobs that they had for Duke. And they also had people from the West End or the Bottoms, where most Black people had lived in Durham in their early years. Many of them were volunteers. And the elders had kept telling the people from Duke, when Duke was doing oral histories of the Bottoms and the West End of Durham, don't let them destroy the Fitzgerald home. You've got to keep Pauli Murray's house. And so that's how that sort of came about. They learned about Pauli Murray and the Fitzgeralds, who were a very prominent family in Durham. They had a bricklaying company, so a lot of the city buildings, Black Wall Street in Durham, and major buildings were built by Fitzgerald bricks. So we went and we met Barbara Lau. Well, Barbara Lau is like a triple Wikipedia. I've never met anyone who seems to know more about Aunt Pauli, who had done real research, oral histories, and was really interested in Pauli Murray. She gave us a walk around the house, which was in a halfway rehabbed, halfway dilapidated situation. She told us all about the property, and she told us about their vision for uplifting the legacy of Pauli Murray. So I just left Durham in another state, and another emotional, mental state. And after I got home, I kept thinking about it. I said, I'm a family member. It didn't seem like there was any other family member that was deeply involved. They may have been deeply committed, but they weren't involved with the Pauli Murray Project in a significant way. And so I thought, as a family member and as a teacher of young children, that it would be a privilege to assist them and to work with them and to learn from them and to do whatever I could do, but also an honor to do that as a family member. So that's how I got involved in working toward the legacy of Pauli Murray that she really didn't have during her lifetime. That was in 2015. My niece joined the board of directors of the organization, and I worked as a volunteer. And now my niece is a volunteer, and I'm on the board of directors. So I've been working formally with them. So that was a new relationship for me. I had always thought of her as my aunt. I only knew her as my aunt. I enjoyed all of my times with her as an aunt, but I really was not as aware, certainly as I am now, to know all of the impact that she made in the religious world, and especially in the legal world. And of course, as most of you probably know, she really set her standard for being first in many very unique ways. But Aunt Pauli was an extremely humble person. She never sought fame. She never sought glory. She really didn't even seek, or certainly didn't earn, a stable financial situation. She was a lover of books and would help anybody who she thought needed help. So she would go, you know, if she had $5, she would probably share that with someone else or give that to someone else. She loved reading so much and learning so much that when she was low of money, which was very often, she would buy books before she would buy food. And many times she was hospitalized for some medical problem, but exacerbated by malnutrition. And as I researched her in 2018, 19, and 20, I was amazed to see pictures of her where she looked like a really healthy person, because I only knew the other side of Pauli when she was of a very slim frame, and I never thought of her as malnutritious because my mother was very small as well. But we really didn't know how little finances that she actually had. And her pride didn't even allow her to tell her family, you know, that she was really in need. She had so much pride. And so some of those kinds of things, when we, not me probably as a child, but the family would have been glad to have helped her when she needed it. They loaned her cars a lot of times when she wanted to come south and go back to Durham to see family. She definitely didn't want to have to get on public transportation because she knew what that would mean. So I'm going to try to take you back to how she got separated from her 5 brothers and sisters. A lot of people can't understand how close she was to them, even though she was not living with them for her life from the time she was 3 until she left high school. So I hope the things I share with you until Deacon, Cathy, or someone waves the white flag and says, I'm talking too long. Okay. I just want to share from learning about her some of the things that were apparent very young. So she was asked by her Aunt Pauline, who was her namesake aunt, if she wanted to go to Durham with her and or stay in Baltimore with her 5 brothers and sisters because their mother had died. And she said, Aunt Pauline, I want to go with you. And as a 3-year-old, she knew what she wanted to do, and she did it. And that's the way she was all of her life. I heard the story from my family about what I call the pancake caper. And this to me showed how she understood about things that were not fair. And even as a child, she could not name it segregation or something of that nature, but she understood in her very being what was fair for people and what wasn't. So when she was a young girl, she complained to the 4 adults that she lived with that she only got 1 pancake and the grandfather got 3 pancakes. And she went on to tell the adults that this wasn't fair because she was sure she was as hungry as they were. And she felt, you know, they should split them evenly. And she also felt because she ran around and was in and out and was very active compared to them, that she probably was hungrier than they were because she was burning off all of those calories. But she lost that fight. She didn't get another pancake, but this sort of showed what she learned even as a child. And she would walk 3 miles to school because she didn't want to have to ride in the back of the bus. She didn't want to be put in a position that Jim Crow dictated to her. And then, of course, she went on to study and to become a lawyer where she could use her skills, knowledge of the law to fight Jim Crow and Jane Crow, as she named it, when women didn't have the same rights as men.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rosita, but I'd like to open this up for at least a couple of questions before we get ready for liturgy. So, Valeria, do you have a question? I'll be Phil Donahue.
I just wanted to ask if you could share with us one of your favorite memories of Pauli Murray. I know she did a lot of things in terms of working with people like Thurgood Marshall and being behind the scenes and so forth for the work that Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. But what about, what is a favorite memory of yours?
My favorite memory was really seeing with my own eyes at 14 that she did know a lot of important people. I had always heard about my family going to the White House and what have you, and meeting Mrs. Roosevelt. So I asked Aunt Pauli, when are you taking me to meet Mrs. Roosevelt, because the president had died. And she said, well, gee, I'm going this weekend for tea. If I'd known, maybe you could go. So I went home and told my mom and my father that I wanted to go to New York to Aunt Pauli so I could meet Ms. Roosevelt. And unbelievably, they allowed me to miss school, and I went. Aunt Pauli didn't know that I planned to come, but when I asked her to pick me up at Penn Station, she said, well, I have to ask, the First Lady. So she did. And when we got there, there was Golda Meir from Israel. There was Adam Clayton Powell. There was the first female Jewish lawyer who became a judge in the city of New York, and some other dignitaries. And they spoke, and I was introduced, and I got my tea and scones and what have you. But I just sat quietly as they talked about solving world problems. And after they left, I really realized Aunt Pauli does know a lot of important people, and she really does know the First Lady. So that's always been my favorite experience.
Maybe one more? Does anybody have a question for Ms. Rosita?
Cathy?
Where?
Up here.
Up there? Can you shout it?
Yes, I can. Miss Rosita, could you briefly let us know about Dr. Pauli Murray's education, which school she went to? And the second part would be, how old was she and what made her decide to go to seminary?
She first went to Hunter College, which is City College of New York now. She had graduated at the top of her class in Durham. She got there, found out that her North Carolina education didn't equate to a New York State, education, and she would have to take another grade of high school. It turned out she had to take 2 grades of high school, but she only had permission to stay in New York a year with a relative. So she did 2 years in 1 year and passed the Regents. She graduated from Hunter. When she left Hunter, I was during the Great Depression, so even with that first degree, she really couldn't get a job. She just did anything. She was a waitress. She was a switchboard operator. You know, I think anything that was legal and not immoral, she was willing to do to survive. She then tried to get into UNC. UNC was a college where our slaveholder ancestors had given a lot of money, were very prominent there, had buildings named after them, and had given money for scholarships. She assumed she'd be able to get a scholarship there. Of course, she couldn't, not because she was a female, but because she was a person of color. So she just did sort of odd jobs, temporary jobs, etc. And while she was trying to raise money to save a black sharecropper who had killed the owner of the farm, some professors from Howard University saw her talking to a group of ministers to raise money. They gave her or offered her a scholarship to law school. They thought she sounded like a lawyer. They thought she could be a good lawyer, and they just liked what they saw and heard. So she comes to Howard. She has no money, but she's got money to go to school. She lives in the basement of a dorm with a hot plate and gang bathrooms while she was in law school. She got through law school, the only female in her class, sort of bullied and poo-pooed by the professors and the males because they thought it was ridiculous for a woman to be getting a law degree. What would she ever do with it? She showed them, if you challenge Pauli Murray, step back, wait, she's probably gonna do what she said she would do. So she was the top student the junior year. They wouldn't let her be the judge of the court. Her senior year, she was a top student. They let her be the judge of the court. And then all the other top students at Howard were given a Rosenwald scholarship to go to Harvard to get a master's. She applies to Harvard. They say, no, 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 no. You're not the right gender. You can't come in. President Roosevelt even wrote a letter to ask for her to be admitted. They said it's against our policy. No women, bye-bye. So she did go out to California, Berkeley, and get a master's in law. And many of you may know, after that, after teaching constitutional law in Ghana and helping to set up their law school, and being run out of there because she was too democratic, she went to Yale, and she was the first black person, male or female, to get a doctorate of law from Yale. So she was very educated, not to mention other coursework she did, set up the first African American studies at Brandeis University, and the list goes on and on and on. But yes, she did have a wonderful education. I believe if she'd been born 20, 30, 40 years later, she would have been, she would have really, I think she would have been on the Supreme Court, frankly. And she did write a letter to President Nixon to consider her for the Supreme Court. But of course, I'm sure they thought it was a joke. But she really wanted to be educated. She always felt education was a way to uplift yourself. My whole family always believed that. So it was never if you're going to college, it's when you're going to college, and when you're going to continue to keep reading and studying and learning and moving up. But she was a very unique person, and I'm glad I knew her for 43 years.
Thank you, Miss Rosita.
Thank you. Would you join me again in thanking Miss Rosita for her very, very personal look at the life of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray? So for the next 10 minutes, we have a little bit of a break as we transition into the liturgy that celebrates and commemorates the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. It is your opportunity if you need to stretch your legs a bit as we transition into the next portion, where we are very honored to have the very Reverend, Bishop, I forgot your name, Bishop Jennifer Baskerville Burrows. All week we've been at conference together. So we're very honored that she will be presiding over the liturgy that follows in just a few moments.